evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order the June 3rd meeting of the Carroll County Planning and Zoning Commission. Can we establish a quorum, please?
Ms. Cheatwood?
Here.
Mr. Huff?
Here.
Mr. Canali?
Here.
Mr. Waters?
Here.
Mr. Soiston?
Here.
Ms. Kirkner?
Here.
Mr. Gosnell? Commissioner Rothstein?
Here.
Secretary Eisenberg?
Here.
Ms. Chair, please let the record reflect that 7 members are present and we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Can we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have an agenda for tonight. Are there any changes?
No, there are no changes to the agenda for this evening.
Move approval of the agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll move on to number 5 on our agenda tonight, administrative report.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So this is our second virtual planning commission meeting. Our first one that has been a work session and not a business meeting. I'm going through my binder that I keep for all of our meetings, and we have had very few work sessions in the last few months. The last one that we had was in February. So I'm really happy that we're here this evening, albeit virtually. And I don't see this trend continuing. I see us having more Wednesday evening meetings. We have a lot of work to get through, and I think we're ready to do that now. So I would anticipate definitely having evening meetings, obviously tonight, July, and that meeting will be a week further back. I believe we talked about July 8th at our last meeting that Wednesday, because the week before is the week of the July 4th holiday. And I know with people's vacations and things like that, that's always been a historically tough week for Planning Commission. And we will also have an August meeting as well. July does have a 5th Wednesday. So I think we just need to determine whether we'll have the optional 5th Wednesday meeting on the 29th, but I would definitely anticipate an August 5th meeting. Other than that, I don't have anything else for the commission this evening. Are there any questions?
Okay, then I guess we'll move on to item number 6, the water and sewer amendment and the introduction. Price?
Thank you very much. Let me see if I am able to share my screen. Unfortunately, it's not. Here we go. Yeah. Let's see what I can get going here. Well, if I can't get my screen to share, I believe they did send out the presentation I was going to try to do. I'll keep on trying to get the screen to share. Let's try one other screen.
Copy from Laura this afternoon.
Nothing's up. Though.
Yes. Let me try something real quick. I'm going to try to share my other screen. I got 2 screens up right now. There we go. Is anybody able to see that?
Yes. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Good. All right, so this is our spring amendment to the water and sewer master plan. So we've actually, a couple things, since it's been a while since we've had an amendment. Obviously, the biennial amendments are done twice a year, typically in the fall and the spring. This is going to be a late spring amendment. But however, we've had a couple of items that come up. Individually, we've had property owners that have come to us to ask for map amendment changes. And then there was one area in Mount Airy, there was a portion of one of the tables that we got the stuff to MDE, but they already approved the triennial update. So the MDE said just at the next amendment cycle, add that information. And then of course, one of the bigger portions is the city of Westminster. They redid their chapters for both water and sewer. And so we worked with MDE about that. So at the time, they had some questions pertaining to the chapters. So MDE and ourselves, as well as the city, decided to approve as is, and then finish working on the chapters and do a follow-up amendment. So that's where we are today with that. So the big amendments to the water and sewer chapters, as you can see, the city of Westminster revised both their water and sewer chapters upon verifying and updating information which MDE commented on during the review of the master plan. All this information has been sent to MDE. We've been back and forth with them and the city, and so in the draft form. So they're ready to pretty much to the final stage of when this amendment goes through, their portion will be complete. Also, the town of Mount Airy, like I said a minute ago, provided updates to table 9B, which we forwarded to MDE, and now this amendment will just make those official. They're already in the document back in MDE, but they have not been put out further because they need to be made official. And like I said, we have a couple of map amendments. 3 of them are in the Freedom Water Sewer Service area, and 2 of them are in the Westminster Water Sewer Service area. And you will see there's one that may potentially happen in Manchester. As we get to that one, we'll talk a little bit further if you have any questions. So first is the Berger property. Some of y'all may know this as Dandelion Ridge. It is down off Ridge Road in the southern portion of the county. The owner has requested this property be removed from the priority service area for both water and sewer. And they sent an email stating they have no intent at all to connect to the public utilities. And they've actually gone through a building permit process, and in the process of building, if it's not done already, there is one additional house on the lot that I believe is up in this area right here. So that is going to be now taken out of priority, and we're going to put it into, I believe, long range, just in case, should they ever decide to sell the property one day, it may be a little bit easier for them to get back in. But long range does not affect the tables. We don't need to calculate any numbers for demand for the tables. So that aspect, that there's going to be some excess capacity we have, which will end up being used at this next property right here. This, some of you probably know it as Long Reach Farms, lot 20, but this is the Stavlos property. They purchased this back in June of last year, and the engineer has requested on behalf of the owner to add this particular property in the water and sewer service area in priority. We've been in talk with MDE. We've been in talk with the school board to potentially come across with the line and tie into the line over here at the school. So we're getting all that information together, but this is a development that they're looking to hopefully get done within the next, I'm not sure the timeline, but they want it for it to happen. They need to be on water and sewer for this particular project.
Is one question, Price, is that a residential or commercial?
It is, my understanding is a planned business center with potential of residential on the second floor, is my understanding. From
Okay,
what they,
It's zone C2, Dan.
correct.
okay, thank you.
And finally, this is Snowden Creek Road. The pump station is right here, which we actually just updated. This came about when we had an inquiry about a lady purchasing a lot and wanting to tie into the sewer system. And when I pulled it up, we're not showing it to be a part of it. When I talked to the Bureau of Utilities, they said, yes, these 4 properties, which actually have houses, are connected to the sewer system. They're on well, but on sewer. So we're looking to make this bring this up to date. So we show these 4 houses in existing, and then potentially probably put these 2 lots in priority, or we can put them in existing final planning should they want to be developed in the future. Since this lady inquired about this property, but since then she's now found a different property that she is looking at. Now on to the city of Westminster. This is the LEF Stone Chapel property on the corner of Avondale and Stone Chapel Road. For reference, this is Performance Foods right here. As you can see, a portion of the property is already in existing water and sewer. The city came to us, and I see Andrew is here, so if you have any questions, she may be able to give a little more insight. The city came to us and is asking for the majority of the property, which is, this is all within the red, is zoned industrial. This is conservation, but just the industrial portion of the property, they are looking to bring into existing for water and sewer, the entire property. So we're working with the city the map will show the entire property as existing final planning. However, the tables for water and sewer will be made to spread out the allocation or the demand over the 10-year period. So roughly 0 to 6 will have X amount of demand, and then years 7 to 10 will have the final demand, since the city has the water allocation policy they have right now. So that's sort of what we're looking at right there for that particular property. It could be definitely a fairly nice industrial area that's looking to come in, I believe. Not sure what they're potentially going to bring in there, but I think they're going to, my understanding is potentially 1 building a year. I'm not sure how many buildings total, but that is my understanding. I think they're in the very beginning stages, and there's nothing concrete, but of course, having them on water and sewer is a good idea. And then finally, this property is on Goodwin's Quarry Road. Yeah, we're Ridge Road right here. Robert Moten Center is right there. This property, when we did the Trellendale update, a lot of properties that were not developed were looked at and said, and the city at the time said, let's take them out and reserve everything for what's already either developed or keep things and moving forward with our business aspect. This particular property came out of water, but for some reason, the sewer aspect remained. So this is, in essence, we'll be removing this portion of the property. And again, the owner actually came to us and asked for this also. And when I pulled it up, I realized the water was we took it out of the service area, but for whatever reason, the sewer remained. So again, this was a request by the owner of the property to take it out of the sewer service area. And that is what we're looking to do.
With that where that particular property is there, am I remembering correctly that there's some sort of stormwater management facility going in around that location? Am I dreaming that, or?
I am not familiar with that on this particular property.
I thought there was something going on in that area related to the city of Westminster. Maybe I'm misplacing where it is. Okay.
Down here's the old sewer, sewer station, wastewater treatment station. The one thing you could be thinking of is potentially the quarry and the mussels that we had removed, which is in and around this area, but I'm not sure of an actual stormwater management pond to my knowledge, unless that's something new that could be coming down the pike that we haven't heard of yet.
Okay.
Do we know why they want to remove it from the priority service area for sewer?
I believe I don't believe there's have any intention on trying to develop it. I can verify with the engineer, if you let me to, I'd be happy to do that, to verify with the engineer, since he's the one that brought the request forward about removing this property, and get back with you and give you and update the planning commission. But off the top of my head,
Yeah, you don't really have to do that. I was just curious. I mean, I don't want to put you, I trust your representation, of course. I was just curious as to what the motivation was, if there's some benefit to not being in it or what might be behind it. But no, I'm not trying to give you more work to do.
no, not at all. I think, the biggest thing is I've been to the property and it's fairly heavily wooded. Obviously, you have streams that run through here. So I think, again, the lady who owns it has no intention on even trying to build. And if she does, I think she would rather be on well and septic potentially. But again, off the top of my head, unfortunately don't remember if there was an exact
Bryce,
reason.
do you mind if I say something?
Go ahead, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. So I apologize. I don't know about this amendment for the service area, but I do want to say that just to remind everybody about the Westminster's water allocation policy that Price talked about a little bit earlier. Right now, we have an allocation policy from 2018 to 2024, and it is how the city wants to distribute water amongst categories such as residential, commercial, industrial. And so for residential inside and outside the corporate limits, there is allocation for one house per year. So we do have for inside the city, we do have applications that do go till 2024. And so if this person wants to come out of the service area, perhaps because there isn't any allocation at this time to serve them, and because they're in our service area, they may not be able to get a well or a septic while being inside of a service area.
Correct. Thank you.
And Andrew, also to add to that, this particular property was part of a rezoning that happened in the county several years ago as well, that went from industrial back to residential at the request of the property owner.
Okay. And it is one of the things that I apologize, going outside of the corporate limits, once again, we do have the same one house per year. And we have talked to different people who do have enough land to have either a well or a septic, and are finding that they aren't able to get the permits to do so because they are in fact in our service area. So that might be a reason why, if this person chooses to develop in the future, they would prefer to be on well and septic, because they maybe because there just isn't any allocation at this time to serve them.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. And finally, this is the one I mentioned earlier, Manchester, where they made a request about a week and a half ago. So, but there's a couple of things that may not move forward at this time. But they made a request. There's currently a property owner that is own well and septic, and the current well is beginning to fail. And in order then to actually get a new well, they would actually need to be brought out of the service area, because they are currently in the existing service area, and there's a line that runs right in front of their house. But from my understanding from talking with Manchester, the cost basis for that is more than they can afford to do. So again, the one thing is the Manchester Comprehensive Plan shows this property in the service area. And in order for it to be consistent with the service area, it would need to be brought out, and their comp plan would have to be updated to show this particular thing. They just updated their comprehensive plan in 2018.
How big of property is it?
I will show you. Actually, I did put the slide together. It is this property right here in red. It is literally one house.
Okay, looks pretty small.
Here's the high school right here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So again, so the completed actions, I guess I mentioned earlier, is the city of Westminster we sent their information to MDE in draft form, and all the comments have come back and forth. They're going back and everything is appeared to be taken care of with MDE and the city. So that big portion of it is taken care of. Again, Mount Airy, their updates, MDE has those already, and they're ready to insert them into the actual master plan once we get the amendment taken care of. So right now in process, I'm working on updating the water and sewer maps. I'm doing that through our GIS department within Department of Planning. And I'm also updating the demand calculations for the water and sewer tables. The big one is with Westminster. Since they're adding demand in priority and future, their numbers will obviously go up, but I'm working with Andrea for that making sure we get those to where the city feels comfortable. And then for the Long Reach Farms, lot 20, their demand will be covered by the demand we set aside for the Ridge Road property, or what is known as Dandelion Ridge. So those will almost be a complete wash. So that the biggest numbers will be just the city of Westminster and working on those numbers and getting those finalized and get those tables updated. So the next steps, I'm going in front of the City of Westminster Planning Commission on July 14th to get theirs to certify that this update is coincides with their comprehensive plan. The town of Manchester, I'll finalize everything and get with them probably again tomorrow, because I haven't heard back from them. Let them know they need to more than likely get their comprehensive plan taken care of before we can move forward with this, just to make sure there are no snags when it goes to MDE and if MDE has any questions. And then I'll be back in front of the Planning Commission on July 21st for the certification, and then to have this forwarded to the Board of County Commission. And that is it. Are there any further questions, comments?
No questions, anybody?
Yep.
Go ahead, Dan. Okay. No questions.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to item number 7, the Board of Education Facilities Master Plan, presentation and discussion with both Linda Eisenberg and Bill Kane.
Yeah, so Chris, when you get a chance, if I could take over the screen, just to kind of go over this presentation, that would be helpful. So from our last meeting, let me get my screen up. Oh, sorry, there's my family. There was a lot of discussion that came out of this regarding the Educational Facilities Master Plan, the Freedom Plan, and where we stand with the redistricting group and things like that. So I wanted to come back and circle back around and go over what we've done for the Freedom Plans, how we look at the Educational Facilities Master Plan, what the Board of County Commissioners has the latitude and authority to do moving forward, and how that fits into this commission. So we have a concurrency management within our chapter 156. And within that, it lays out a process that allows development to proceed at a pace that is matched by the budgeting for and construction of needed facilities and services. This concurrency management, or adequate public facilities ordinance, which is how a lot of people refer to it as, came about in the early 2000s when Carroll County was growing very rapidly, and we wanted to make sure that our development did not outpace roads, schools, water, sewer infrastructure needed to support that development. And as you all know, we look at concurrency management in two places during the development review process: when you see a preliminary plan and when you see a final plan. Most of this planning commission actually had to put projects on hold from concurrency management with fire safety and EMS, with a project that happened in the Westminster area, which was a 1 or 2 lot subdivision that needed to move forward. But we're going to talk about this in terms of schools tonight. Schools are considered adequate if they are below 110% capacity, approaching inadequate if enrollment is between 110 and 119, and then inadequate if it exceeds 120%. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is these capacities were set by the Board of County Commissioners. So these are not imposed by any state law or anything like that. These were simply, benchmarks set by the county at that time.
Yeah, so back when the concurrency management ordinance was initially developed and then subsequently amended, changed in 2004, 2005, there was actually a work group that worked on making recommendations as far as what the standard should be. It is a number that the county adopts as part of their ordinance. There are other counties use different numbers. I will say there are a lot of counties that use 120% as kind of the inadequate. Where the 120% came from, I'm not sure that anyone's real sure who set that benchmark, whether it was some other county used it and then other counties copied it, or whether there was some rationale, but it is something that's only contained within the county's ordinance.
Great, thank you, Bill.
And one question, I'm sorry, Linda, one quick question for Bill. What is the history of why, so when the Board of Ed when they use their terminology of adequate and inadequate, they even have their own standard. What is the history of how that came about? Refresh my memory. It's a little off.
Yeah, so in the early 2000s, when there was a halt put on building, the county decided to. People called it a moratorium. The county had a different name, but the name escapes me. But basically, they put development building on hold for a year so that they could revise their existing concurrency management and adequate public facilities ordinance. At that same time, and part of the reason they did that was because the overcrowding in schools was outpacing the ability to relieve schools. And I believe also water, sewer, police, fire, all of the services. So why the Board of Ed got involved is because they felt like they needed to have their own standard, because they felt 120% was waiting until 120%. They felt like was waiting too long. And at the same time, there were several municipalities that adopted their own standard. If you actually look at some of the towns, they will have a different standard than the county has. So a lot of it came out of that, just the concern of growth in the early 2000s and kind of everybody trying to have, appease their own constituents, but also, I guess, help themselves plan a little better so that we didn't get into a situation where we had, at one time, I believe probably, and Clay would remember, but probably 40–50% of the county was considered inadequate for schools. So development couldn't happen in about half the county because of that. I don't know if I do that.
So thanks for explaining, because it is, I vaguely remember some of that history. I was actually on that growth task force way back when. But it's just, when I was reviewing everything in detail and you see the different percentages is just, it's kind of awkward. Because from our standpoint, planning commission, our definition of approaching inadequate or inadequate is different than your definition. So
Yeah,
it's just,
I agree. It is confusing, especially as someone who has to explain it. You know, it comes up frequently. Why is there two different numbers? And I think the gist of it is just the Board of Ed wanted a trigger in place to start looking at something before it became inadequate by the county standard.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And during that same time frame, if you all recall too, is when the county also imposed the 25 building permits a year to be pulled. And then several years ago, Tom Doublebiss went back to the Board of County Commissioners to increase that for age restricted. So again, these were all imposed as part of the growth control measures that came out of the rapid development of the 90s and early 2000s. So when we do a plan, and most recently the Freedom Plan, we do work with Bill and we look at school projections in that particular community. So table 2 and element 10 refers to existing schools and enrollment and data projections. And as of the time of this plan, the information we had was from the 2017-2016 facilities master plan. And as you can see, all of the schools, even in the outer years, were well below the threshold of approaching inadequate. So just to summarize the Freedom Plan, countywide, as well as Freedom, school enrollment at all levels has been decreasing for a number of years. And we saw that as evidenced by the 3 school closures that we had several years ago. Again, at the time of the Freedom Plan, there was no need to construct new schools or increase the size of any existing buildings. Capital resources have been used more for renovation and maintenance of these schools. In 2012, the board agreed to suspend the school facilities impact fees, which we used to have on new residential development. And each time it's come up subsequently with the Board of County Commissioners, that has been suspended again. So we have not, it's on the books, but there's been no fee associated with impact fees for new residential development. Also, not only did we look at the school projections within the Freedom area, but we also made sure these adequacies were still relevant at the time of build-out. And again, not to get too in-depth on the Freedom Plan, but we used our buildable land inventory numbers, which is what we have as the best available information based on zoning, water and sewer, certain land restrictions as to what the carrying capacity, for lack of a better word, could be on a particular parcel. So how it could be really, truly subdivided for housing. And we did Freedom, the town of Sykesville, and then the total build out. And again, at the time of the plan, looking at what build out would be, looking at what the school capacity could be. Again, none of the capacities were even approaching inadequate in any of our scenarios for elementary, middle, or high school. So this graph is from our most recent educational facilities master plan and just shows 3 of the schools for their 2016 through 2019 capacity numbers, their enrollment numbers, and their projections for the next 10-year time frame is how it's broken out in the report itself. And so what this shows, so blue represents Carrolltown Elementary, orange represents Freedom, and green Oklahoma Road Middle School. And these were all some of the schools that were in that approaching inadequate. And as you can see, the school enrollment and capacity numbers, I'm going to go to the next slide because I think it's a little bit easier for me to read. In Carrolltown, the capacity was 598. The enrollment was 532, so they were under, and the projection in 10 years was 578. So still not even coming close to the total capacity of what the school is. But then, as you can tell, the capacity numbers change for all 3 of these schools. So Carrolltown lost 10 seats, Freedom lost 23 seats and Orms lost 50 seats to their schools. And this changed then the capacity and enrollment projections. The other thing is too, is that in a 5-year time span, the 10-year projection also increased dramatically to now be well over, especially Oklahoma Road Middle School, where the 10-year capacity exceeds the 2019 enrollment. And I'm sure Bill can do way more justice explaining this when after I'm done my
Well, while you're on that slide, I guess the question for Bill is, what happened to that capacity? Did that have to do more with the number of teachers at the school, or how does that capacity disappear over time?
So the capacity of a school changes through the life of a building because the instructional usage of the building changes. You know, at one time, the class size in the state rated formula for elementary was 30 kids in a classroom. Over time, the state lowered it to 25, and now it's 23 for first grade through 5th grade and 20 for kindergarten. So the state formula changes to acknowledge the fact that we no longer put 30 plus kids in an elementary school, and the class size over time has changed. The other change that happens is, you know, locally, there have been decisions the Board of Ed have made, like the addition of the health class, which is considered a special content area in the elementary schools, similar to art or music. They wanted to give the elementary teachers more planning time to be able to better teach. So they added the health program. I want to say that was before I came over here. So it was early 2000s. Well, the schools have been basically, the elementary schools have been running the health program, and they've been using a classroom that would have been considered a capacity classroom for the last 15 years or so. It just has never been recognized that they need a classroom. In 2017, the board finally, you know, the school system finally said, we're going to recognize that. We want to get a better idea what the true utilization of these buildings is. So we actually took the health classroom out of the elementary capacities because you only count the homerooms in the elementary capacity because they're either in their homeroom or then they go to art, music, health, PE. They're not in both places at the same time, so you don't double count those seats. And basically it changes over time. I would say going back 10 years, you know, annually 1 or 2 schools will change if there's a new instructional program offered at that school. If we add a regional special ed program like the autism programs that we added at Hampstead Elementary and Winfield, that changed the capacity because now we're using that space differently. And special ed has a different class size than a regular ed. So we modify we request from the state a change in state rate capacity as our instructional program changes to reflect what's actually going on in the building. So it's not a lot of people think you build the school and that's it. That's what it's meant to hold forever and ever. And that's not the way the state rate capacity is meant to work. It's meant to reflect the actual usage of the building and how many students you can actually instruct with your instructional program in a day. So that's.
Bill, thanks for explaining that. That provides me a little bit better understanding of what's going on or how those numbers can change over time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bill. So then now looking at the development end of it, I just wanted to share with you too, the 10-year freedom use and occupancy permits and then countywide. So we've been holding pretty steady, as you can see from the top, our residential UNOs. 2010 being fairly low, 2011 even dipping down further, and then pretty holding steady in the low 300s with a couple peaks here and there. 2019 was a good year with UNOs. We had 358. And those use and occupancies really just represent single family units. As you can see, here are the numbers on the next line for the Freedom District. And Freedom's been, you know, quite considerably lower than the rest of, than the entire county as a whole. So this entire county number also includes the municipalities, not just the unincorporated areas. So, you know, Freedom is a fraction of that. And out of that, the multifamily, you can see is this row here, and there were no multifamilies in 2019. The multifamilies, though, are only age restricted. They are not non-age restricted because we have not processed any apartments or any other type of multifamily units within the Freedom area. I think the last one we did, and I wish Clay was here with us this evening, was really back in the 80s and 90s with Carrolltown. That was our PUD that actually had a true multifamily component as part of it. So everything else you see is age restricted. And then this is the county building permit data. So this is different than UNO. So this is the issuance of building permits. This is when they can take occupancy. And you can see they're really around that 300 roughly or so mark as well. We do not have 2019 numbers yet. So I just wanted to show the blue line is, this is a graphical representation of the table I just showed you. The blue line represents the total county UNO, and you can see, you know, from the Great Recession, how we've had, you know, a dip, and then we've been holding pretty steady since, you know, the economy and the housing market has rebounded somewhat, starting in 2013, and again now in 2019, the housing market really shot back off again. And there's also been nationally a supply-demand issue, that there has been very little supply of new housing or housing out on the market, and a higher demand. I think as millennials now want to become homeowners, the demand is surging and there's just not a ton of supply. The bottom lines here represent the Freedom area, or election district 5. So the orange line is the single family UNO, and the green line is the multifamily. And again, the multifamilies held pretty steady. We had a peak and then a drop off. That also is due to, we just don't have a lot of land left in the election district 5 that can accommodate multifamily use and occupancy. So I don't see this, unless there's other land rezoned or designated, I don't see this curve really ever coming up. And I see the residential probably holding fairly steady moving forward as well. I know this seems like a kind of confusing graph, but I just want to show more of the order of magnitude of what's happening in South County in relationship to enrollment and use and occupancies. So these are the enrollment numbers from 2015 to 2019. And per the 5 schools, the elementary, and then the 2 middle and 2 high in the South County area that would really comprise election district 5, what their enrollments are, and then what the change has been from year to year. So in 2015, there were 6,328 students. That increased by 3 over all 12 grade levels amongst all the schools in the area. 2017, it went up by 80. And then that number dropped to 71 students, again, across all grade levels in 2018. And then there was an uptick again of enrollment across all grade levels in 2019. So for a net gain in students of 91 students, looking and using the educational facilities master plan numbers to derive this table. Meanwhile, use and occupancy change has been very little. We had a lot of use and occupancy permits pulled in 2016. That was a gain of 19 from 2015. But then we had 25 less pulled in 2017 and 1 less in 2018, and then just slightly more in 2019. And the whole point of this is to show that development is not necessarily driving the growth and change in our schools. There are other contributing factors that are changing the number of students coming into schools. So it's not driven by development, but growth either by homes turning over that were occupied by maybe empty nesters or single families, and now being replaced to the age and natural turnover now being replaced with families of school-aged children. We have not been able to really pinpoint or tease that out. I'm sure Bill has much more insight into that. But one of the points I wanted to drive home was that it's not new development. It's just natural growth and attrition from the schools that are really changing where this information and where these school numbers are moving forward. So again, the 10-year projected enrollment for the Freedom Plan for Freedom Elementary, Carrolltown, and Oklahoma Middle were 532, 578, and 697 respectively. But the actual enrollments were 567, 576, and 695. The enrollment for these schools in the 3-year met or exceeded the 10-year projections, while the number of residential UNOs decreased over that same time period. So I guess just some conclusions one can infer from this, that there are other forces here that are responsible for the increases in enrollment at these schools. So I think, from a planning commission standpoint, nothing that has been adopted and implemented yet in the Freedom Plan has taken effect yet to drive some of this. It's already been kind of in the works and happening, and would have happened regardless of where we were in plan or plan implementation. So that being said, I mean, there are some—
Linda, if I can,
Yes.
Does this take into consideration the properties within the Freedom Plan that have the ability to build out residential, the 3 large properties?
First, taking this into consideration, they were taken into consideration with the original Freedom Plan numbers. So yes, they were as part of that build out scenario. I'll just flip back my slide. So in this slide here, as you can see across the elementary, middle, and high, and build out means to the best of our ability, being able to see if that property, what it would be like to be fully developed to its maximum potential. Now, there's a lot of caveats in there, but at the issuance of the Freedom Plan and its adoption, the schools were 93% for elementary, 98% capacity in the middle, and 85 at the high school.
So is this also the ability to cross-level the elementary schools? Because we know that the Freedom Elementary School is over capacity. So you're looking at the whole. Is this looking at the 6 elementary schools within the district, or is it looking at cross-leveling between?
But that becomes very challenging and kind of almost like a dangerous scenario, because we're not sure how things are going to move, and there's so many other factors that play, and the fact that there are measures that can be taken to redistrict schools or to change boundaries and things like that. So that's got
to be part of the long-term plan, the ability to have a redistricting system in place to ensure cross-leveling if appropriate, and trying to keep them within the same school system. So the 3 elementary schools that feed into Orms, you cross-level those 3 elementary schools. And then go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so I just, the importance of looking at what I guess could be, I want to say the most dangerous situation, most dangerous course of action is if we build out all those areas and we get, 3-4 kids in those homes, and we get a flood of, a situation that we're going to be over capacity in one elementary school area. So that's why the redistricting piece of this is very important for the schools to have in place, to have a system in place where they're able to stand up a redistricting task force to look at the data that you're sharing and to be able to cross-level appropriately. Because right now, it's my understanding that Freedom is over capacity and Carrolltown is very close. You know, and the redistricting task force stood up, but now they stood down because of the pandemic. So it's taking much, much longer for them to reconvene, to look at, and I'm just talking about 21, 22 timeframe, not forecasting out. So,
Well, and to add on with what you're saying, Ed, is what I'm concerned about is, you know, as a planning commission, we might be put in a position where a plan will come in front of us down in the southern part of the county or in the Freedom area, and we're forced to, you know, it's deemed inadequate. Right now, Freedom is going to be inadequate very shortly. And what is frustrating for me as a planning commission member is that there's a resolution, and the resolution is redistricting. And no, not to get too much into politics here, but I'll say it because I've been around a while. The Board of Ed seems to always drag their feet with addressing redistricting when they need to. And it's,
yeah,
I'm going to be very upset if we're in a position that we have to start turning down projects just simply because when you look at the capacity numbers in the Southeast area, we're not going to be inadequate in that overall area. It's just that it needs to be rebalanced, and no one's done that.
right. And then we've already done that with one project last year. I think it was 35 homes that we said the school system would not be able to support those 35 homes at that time. And the Board of Education, I am going to take another tone on it, and they are very receptive. We are working very close, we being the Board of Commissioners, with the superintendent and the Board of Education, and they are addressing the redistricting situation. And they did stand up to task force, and they feel that there's too much risk right now in continuing it virtually because of the needs of the GIS maps and the ability to really the devil in the details, and that's kind of where they're at. So we walked through that. I was concerned, and still am, that they have lost momentum on that redistricting discussion. But Dr. Lockhart and the Board of Education are confident that they will reconvene and they will move forward with it. But Linda, going back to this, that's got to be, to me, a part of the conversation and long-term vision for what we're talking about. I inherited this. You all did a lot of work with the Freedom Plan, and you really sharpened your pencils in getting it done. And I know there was concern because of specific growth areas within the Freedom Plan associated with the schools. So I don't want us to be put in a position where it's like you said you're going to do this with the Freedom Plan, but now all of a sudden the schools will not be able to support that growth. And that, at least that's what I'm seeing, in front of me. Does the growth that is able to be put in place in accordance with what the Freedom Plan has in design right now, are the schools able to absorb that entire growth without the flexibility of redistricting? And I think the answer is no. So therefore, you need to have a redistricting tool put in place with the first, and I apologize being so parochial about this, but it's important that the tool at first is to keep the integrity of the system. So the three elementary schools to the middle school to the high school to Liberty. And I mean, that should be the first, effort. First effort is to keep them in place if possible. Second would be then to look at them in that cluster. Third would be then looking at them in the second cluster. And then fourth, outside of District 5, outside of the Liberty and Century footprint. So I just feel like that's an important piece of this that has to be put in there very clearly, to show that, and going back to what you're saying, Dan, to show the accountability of the Board of Education and the schools to address. So, and I'm done.
So, I sit on the Freedom Elementary Redistricting Committee, and Commissioner Ralston, to your point, that's exactly the approach that they're taking. Bill and his group are really leading a team to be able to do that. So that's their process. But just a couple other things, so in Chapter 156, there are some remedies that can occur. So if the designation is something that is considered as inadequate, no project may be approved by the commission if the public facility or service is inadequate or projected to be inadequate during the current CIP. So that's a 6-year time frame, unless a relief facility is planned to address the inadequacy. So that's one, you could build a new school. Or the developer provides mitigation acceptable to the county, so whatever that might be, in the county, whatever the Board of County Commissioners would deem as appropriate. Or the Board of County Commissioners has determined that exceptional circumstances exist to allow the approval despite the inadequacy or approaching inadequacy. And this is what happened in a totally different way with Westminster and the fire and EMS being the first two being inadequate. And then it was for that one-off, if you all remember, I think off of Old Westminster Pike. And that was the remedy there, is that the developer approached the board and said that there's some exceptional circumstances. And Mr. Merck is here too, so he may want to speak to that later once we're done here. No residential plat may be recorded or final site plan approved until a relief facility is planned to address the inadequacy in the current CIP and has construction underway and completion is anticipated within 6 months, or the developer provides acceptable mitigation to the County Board of Commissioners, or they determined that exceptional circumstances exist. And then Tim Burke, correct me if I'm wrong, also, you could go back to the original code and change the adequacy percentages. I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's also something else to consider in all of this. So that's all I have for you with that. Talk amongst yourselves.
One other comment I just wanted to make is, I think we've addressed the Freedom area or the Southeast on the elementary school level. I will say I thought it was interesting when reviewing in detail. There does appear to definitely be an issue on the middle school level in the southeastern area, which to me, when I was looking at it, seemed a little bit more problematic because the overall capacity level in that region gets to 114%, as opposed to the elementary issue we were just talking about. On the outside, it gets to 105. So I just thought, not that we're doing anything about that at this particular moment, but I wonder, Bill, do you have any comments related to that or thoughts related to that? Because I've heard a lot about the Freedom elementary issue, but I hadn't really heard a lot about the middle school related issue that I kind of see coming down the tracks.
Yes, so the middle school issue is identified in the master plan as a concern, but it's not the overcrowding. And really what triggered the committee to be formed last year was the fact that Freedom was projected to be inadequate by the county standard, which is 120%, which 105%, is one thing, but when you get into the over 120%, 130%, it does start to impact the school's ability to function. The cafeteria is only so large to handle groups of kids for lunch. The media center is only so large. It becomes a scheduling problem. Now you have to add additional art or music teachers, and they need space. So Really what triggered it was the freedom was so severe. We said we need to start looking at it. Doesn't mean that the middle school is a concern. It's just not as high of a priority, I guess. I will say that the committee, we didn't dive into the middle school, but it has been brought up by the parents, so we've talked about it. At this point, because we do enrollment projections every year, it basically is kind of let's see how it looks next year. If it continues to get worse, then we would at that point form a committee to look at that. The elementary enrollments growing is part of the reason you see the projected middle school enrollments growing. So if for some reason next year we saw a stabilization or a decline in those elementary schools for whatever reason, we're in a situation really where we don't know what next school year will look like. It would impact those middle school enrollments, and they could come down a little bit. It's just kind of hard to know. So, I don't think it's not being ignored. It's just not right in front of us now, which the elementary schools are, because we do have to address Freedom Elementary.
Yeah, I totally agree that the Freedom Elementary is the priority, and to me, that's yes, I agree. That is definitely the priority right now with where the capacity levels are at that particular school.
Right.
Okay, Bill, do you think we should have a standing group to be looking at the redistricting process as opposed to standing up a ad hoc organization for a specific problem? But, and the group could be a core group meeting quarterly, looking at the entire county, and then obviously, well, I won't say obviously, and then just tailor the organization or that group when a districting concern or situation arises, and make that part of this plan. I mean, the key here is accountability and the ability to address the issues and concerns in a proactive approach as opposed to being reactive. So, what do you think?
I would say, we as an organization, the school system does similar to, and for us, redistricting the same, the county comparative would be rezoning. I know Linda and her staff, are not just looking at land use, every 10 years or 7 years when they do it. They're looking at it all the time. We're looking at it all the time too. I would say, that would be a discussion with the Board of Ed. As it currently stands now, the Board of Ed made the choice with Freedom. They wanted to develop a committee that had members of that specific community, and it would be difficult to have a broader based committee that then made suggestions for different regions if they want to go with that model. It would almost, you have to form it depending on what region you're looking at that time. It doesn't mean you could maybe have a countywide, but the problem becomes is getting people to stay on the committee long term, because we're not going to recommend a redistricting. I doubt we're going to recommend redistricting every year, because moving kids around, one of the things that we don't want to do a whole lot, because it impacts their life, their education, their social well-being. Just like you don't want to rezone property every 4 or 5 years.
That's not meeting where I was going. The core group, talking about 3 or 4 folks as a core group. Again, it's looking at the entire county, communities, populations. It is not focused on redistricting every year. It's it really is looking at the entire footprint, and then when appropriate, in order to be proactive, because already something stood up, you add folks to it tailored to that community, like the Freedom District.
I would, depending on the makeup, I would say that exists. I am the planner who works on the plan. It's kind of part of the reason I have a job. But I work with all of the departments here and we are, you know, when we have issues, we are looking at that when we have concerns of enrollment or overcrowding. So, you know, within the school system, if you're talking about a broader base standing committee with county folks, then that could be different. I do work with the planning staff and have conversations with them during the development of the plan. So, you know, some of what you're talking about exists. People may not be aware of it, but we do a pretty good job here actually staying on top of things. And it's hard. I think a lot of people who haven't been around or involved for so long, you know, this is new now. This is the first time in 10, 15 years that there's an overcrowded school. But if you just go back 15, 20 years ago, it was not unusual for schools to be hundreds of kids over capacity because the growth was happening so rapidly because of zoning and land use decisions made 20, 30 years ago, that we literally had schools, high schools that were 800 kids over capacity, and elementary where we had 10 or 12 portables outside of elementary schools. I mean, we're in a much better place now than we were in the 90s.
And I want to make one comment. I actually think what Ed is talking about is a great idea, and maybe something that he can bring on with the Board of Ed, because I think there's great value in having a sort of committee that would be looking at it on a yearly basis, that you have the skeleton of something. Because what seems to happen, quite frankly, as someone who's been around for a long time, watching the politics of everything, is it takes so much energy to get a redistricting process moving, where if you had a standing committee, that their obligation was to kind of really work with you and the school system, and not just made up of community members, maybe a representative from the planning commission or whatever, but that the backbone would be there. And then once it got to a critical junction that it needed a specific redistricting task force for a particular school, then you bring in those elements. But I think there's great value in what the commissioner is saying, and obviously this is not a place to work this out, but I think that's a great idea, because what I have noticed historically is it tends to take a lot of pressure to get the ball rolling, where if you had a standing committee, and also you have that history, because if you had a committee that was long-term, if they've been through it with one school and then they have to do through it for another school, then they've already been down that road and kind of know some of the pitfalls and positives. But we're getting off track. But I think that's a great idea.
We are losing our signal, and the network is really almost coming to a screeching halt due to circumstances beyond our control. So just for the sake of being able to get the business done, we may want to wrap things up here soon, just so we don't lose our stream.
Okay, so we will take this for action. I appreciate Dan, and I don't often agree with you too much, and I really don't like to too much, but we will take this on. Linda, let's get together about this, and for the next quarterly Board of Education meeting with the commissioners, I also want to bring it up and prepare something for them, okay? And then we'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So I believe what Bill needs from us tonight is just your approval to have Cynthia sign the letter and forward to the board, because they need it for their facilities master plan adoption, to say it is consistent with the master plan. So I did send that earlier today if you want to talk about that letter, if there's any changes that you want made.
I looked at the letter. I think it looks fine. You know, I don't want to get too hung up on it. I think it's fine. So I move approval.
I also agree. I think you covered all the bases in the letter, especially about the redistricting. So I'm willing to make a motion to approve the signing of the letter.
I second it.
Can we just do a voice vote, Linda?
I think for this, yes, I think that's fine. So
Okay.
the motion to give on there, already didn't make the motion. So yes.
So we have a motion and a second to send an approval letter to the Board of Ed. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so I'll sign the letter and email it back to you.
Yeah, that would be great. If you want to sign it, scan it or e-signature it, and then send it back to me and we'll mail it out.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that is the last item on our agenda for tonight. Because we really don't even have a choice either. If we have anything else. Can we make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. Motion and second. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a great evening. Take care.